Paul Leonardi. How are you today?
I'm well, Justin. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for making the time to come on the show. I really appreciate it. Your work so relevant today, with so many digital tools, so many new ones coming at us so fast. Want to start talking about your book, The Digital Mindset. Can you
Sure.
tell us a little bit about what a digital mindset is and why we need to have one today?
Sure. Well, the idea for writing the book came about slowly over a period of years because Siddal, my co-author, and I had been working with lots of different companies that were trying to go through digital transformations and having problems doing it. And, most companies, I think, have a good handle on the fact that you need to rethink your business model and your operating model once you have access to new data and resources. But most don't necessarily know after that, what do I do? And what do I need to know as a senior leader? What do I need to train my managers in the organization to know? What do individual contributors need to know so that we're all rowing in the same direction and can make digital transformation succeed? So that was really the impetus for the book. Was we have so much around strategy already in digital transformation, but we don't have a lot about the tactics of how digital transformation can actually unfold.
Right.
And so what we discuss in the book is that one of the key resources that we have to make digital transformation work is to develop what we call a digital mindset. And the digital mindset is really the ability to see new opportunities with our digital tools to create value for our business in different ways. And I know that sounds high level, but throughout the book, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, we really drill down on what that means in a whole variety of different areas. And just to give you the high level, we suggest, and our research has really shown, that if we approach collaboration, computation, and change differently, those are the seeds by which we build our digital mindset.
It makes perfect sense, especially with the way tools are coming so quickly these days.
Yeah.
People might feel intimidated by feeling like I need to become an expert in this because it's happening now. One of the things that really resonated with me, you talk about the 30% rule. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So we get asked all the time, now that there are all these digital tools available, and in particular that machine learning and AI is taking over our organizations, do I need to learn how to code? Do I need to learn to use Python or Ruby on Rails, or do I need to be an expert in data science? And we really looked into this question quite a bit and looked across a variety of domains. And of course, I can't give one specific answer that covers all cases, but our general premise is that you don't need to know how to do those things like a data science expert or a machine learning expert. What you do need to know is enough to be conversant. You need to know enough so that you could talk to that person, ask them meaningful questions that will give you meaningful answers. And to do that, you need about 30% knowledge in these different areas. And we liken this to learning a second language. So in the workplace, we have lots of people that are in our workplaces that are non-native English speakers, and they don't need fluent levels to be proficient. They just need about, the research shows, about 3,500 words, and 12,000 words is considered native level fluency in English. And so it's roughly 30% of the total. And that analogy works really well when we think about digital skills, is that if you know enough about how a machine learning model is trained, what a neural network is doing, how those neural networks make predictions that we can use, then you know enough to have a conversation to get the answers you need and to use these technologies effectively. As just one example.
Right. And this kind of goes on to that. With generative AI especially coming up so quickly, are some companies implementing it without fully understanding what it can do for them, in the sense of thinking that it's going to add to the bottom line tomorrow?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I want to give you a couple of different answers because it's an important issue for most companies today. The first thing I'm seeing with a lot of the companies that I'm working with is there's an AI tsunami, right? AI is everywhere. They're rushing to try to implement Gen AI in particular as fast as they can because you see all these memes all the time, right? On LinkedIn and other places, it's AI is not going to replace humans. It's people that use AI are going to replace people that don't use AI, so on and so forth. So there's a mad dash to implement as many Gen AI tools as quickly as possible. I don't. What I see though is that there's not always a good use case or a really well-defined strategy for why we're using these particular tools. So I think that's issue number one. Issue number two is that even if you have a plan for a particular line of work where you think that Gen AI or any AI tool could actually be useful, the reality is that the tools are constantly changing and evolving such that you can't completely plan in advance how you're going to use it and what the benefits are going to be.
Right.
It's absolutely imperative that you engage in some amount of experimentation to figure out what are those kinds of tasks where AI could be really useful. And then how do we expand work in ways that allow us to create more opportunities for adding value in our organization? And this is the area that I spend a lot of time working with companies on these days. Is it's really easy to think, we've got a call center operation and most of our call center reps are just saying things that already are on our FAQs constantly, right? And so we'll just automate that piece and we'll have some AI with voice command respond. That's great. But the bigger question is, what are you going to do with the labor that you have saved? Do you just like size down your call center, or are there opportunities to create more value add with the people that you have by doing new things? And if that's true, what are those new opportunities that really are strategically important? And then how do we need to skill our employees so that they can do those new things in addition to sort of managing the AI?
Right. And you have a great Harvard Business Review piece on those types of themes, helping employees be successful with generative AI, adding value. So if an organization has made the choice, we're going to make this a big part of how we do business, what is the one thing, and I know it's hard to ask that one thing, what is the main thing leaders need to understand first?
I think that they first need to understand that work is a process that starts with people doing tasks, that the roles that we play are really just a collection of tasks, and we play those roles vis-a-vis other people in our networks. And so the reason that sounds very basic, but the reason that's so important to understand is that whenever we implement some kind of new tool into our workplace, whether that's AI or some other kind of digital tool, those tools provide us capabilities to change what tasks we do or how we do tasks. And a lot of times the focus with leaders is just on that, right? It's just on how can we change this task, and does that lead us to be have more performance in this area, higher quality in this, faster time to market, whatever it might be. But when the technology changes those tasks that we conduct, then it shifts what we do as employees, right? What our identity is, what expertise and what skills we have. And then it begins to shift who we interact with, who we get knowledge from. So any new technology that we bring into our organization, we have to think of what are the ripple effects from task to role to network, and we have to plan strategically for that. And that's the biggest advice that I can give is think 2 steps ahead of what tasks do you want a technology to change, and map out, is this really the process that we want to go down? And in the book, we talk about this specifically as we call it the work digitization process. I think it's in chapter 8. And we really try to outline, how do you do this planning so that you can make sure that ultimately any tool that you're bringing into your organization changes tasks, roles, and networks in ways that create value for us.
So what you don't want to do is throw it all against the wall and hope something is going to be good.
That's right. Or think that, we've implemented this tool we've implemented Gen AI in our call center. We've automated a little bit of, our response. That's increased the number of queries that we can process. Job is done. Job is not done. That's the first step in a much longer chain. Yeah.
So with employees, understandably feeling intimidated, maybe being concerned about their jobs, what can leadership, especially the top leadership, do to help employees succeed with the technology, calm their nerves a little bit, not make them anxious about implementing those tools, especially like generative AI?
Yeah. So I'll give you 3 ideas here. The first idea is it's about framing. Framing is super important. And this is, managerial discussion, rhetoric, discourse, whatever you might call it, around implementing new tools.
Mhm.
What I've seen time and time again is that if leaders in the organization talk about a new technology as an opportunity for learning, right? They frame it as, we've got some new capabilities. We're not 100% sure what the best use of this tool is going to be. It's our job to work together to figure that out. The success rate for new tool use skyrockets. And importantly, employees feel like they're part of the process. They're being asked to figure out, how do we use these tools effectively?
Right.
And they don't fear them. Okay, so that's number 1, is framing.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2 is incorporating our employees in that process of experimentation. Throughout my career, I've seen so many examples of really well-meaning leaders that, maybe they come out of a particular function, right? Like they came out of marketing or they came out of product design, and they think, okay, I know what work is like in marketing. I know what work is like in product design. And so now that I'm in a position where I can, kind of create a strategy for this organization and I can bring in new tools to support that strategy, I know how work is going to change.
Right.
The reality in most cases is that you don't, as a senior leader. Like,
Right.
you're too far removed from the work. It's changed, and especially these days, right? It's changing so rapidly that you are going to be out of touch. And I'm not casting aspersions on any leader, right? It's a fact of life. So you've got to enroll the people that are on the ground floor doing that kind of work to help figure out what the best use cases are for those tools. I'll give you just a really quick example. I was working with a big life insurance company, and they wanted to, they work to sort of underwrite as many different policies as they can. And that's a fairly formulaic process, right? Like I read through medical record and I look at somebody's application and their medical test scores, and I can decide if this is a policy worth writing or not.
Right.
And the AI, the organization was trying to bring in this new Gen AI tool that would help with some of that unstructured data, make predictions about what policies to underwrite. And the AI was trying to really make predictions about some policies that had a lot of ambiguity in them.
Right.
And what the underwriters were able to recognize was that the AI was actually super good at making predictions about policies where there wasn't a lot of ambiguity. Like it was very clear that this was a good case or not, and it could do it really rapidly. But it had a hard time making good predictions in these cases where things were a little fuzzier. And so the underwriters, said to leadership, we need to stop deploying the AI in this area, and we need to start deploying it in this other area. And making that change was a huge difference. So they were able to reduce the number of medical tests they needed by like 30%. And it was pretty incredible. So my point here is that we have to involve the employees that are doing the work because they understand the work the best. So that's point number 2. And point number 3 is a corollary of that, which is once the employees start to understand work and we understand where these new technologies can be effective, they often are starting to push in new directions where they need new skill. And so this third point, right, for leaders to focus on is that we need to be constantly providing the right skill and reskilling our employees. So in that underwriting case that I mentioned, when employees started spending more of their time focusing on these more ambiguous cases, the skills that they needed weren't skills on how to use Gen AI. They were more communication skills because now they were calling up people and asking them really personal and detailed questions that were sensitive in their medical records. And that takes a fair amount of sophistication, empathy, perspective taking in order to do that well. And so what leadership did at this organization was help provide more communication, empathy, kind of emotional intelligence sorts of training for these underwriters who typically were back office and not having to do any of that kind of work before. So if you put these 3 things together, right, you frame it in a way that says this is a learning opportunity. you involve your employees at all levels in figuring out where are the best places for us to incorporate this into our work. And then third, you provide skill and skilling opportunities constantly as people's roles begin to shift. I think you're in a good spot to make sure your digital transformation works.
So really, we're talking about, as some people think of it, as taking the personality and the personal touch out of this. You're saying the opposite, that we're putting some personal touch, some more personal touch into this because of these things where AI isn't as strong. Is that a good analysis?
In some cases, for sure. The example I gave of the underwriters is clearly one of those. And I could give you many more examples of companies that I've worked with just over the last year and a half where that has been the case. I wouldn't say it's exclusively the case, though. In many instances, people that are using AI effectively develop lots of skills in how to do prompt engineering really well, right? And they figure out, how do I query this chatbot in a way that's going to give me the answers that I need? So there is a sort of technical set of skills that people are developing. But if you are changing work in ways that allows us to expand to opportunities or areas where AI isn't particularly useful, then it is true what you're saying, Justin, that in many of those areas, we need to be skilling people in what we traditionally call the softer skills even more, because we're pushing lots of work that was once in front of a computer, back office, whatever, into fact finding, into decoding sort of mysterious or ambiguous or equivocal kinds of contexts. And that takes a different sort of skill. And often it takes more interpersonal, relational, investigation kind of skills.
Yeah, and that's kind of the fun stuff. I think the prompt engineering is so interesting, and the trial and error aspect of it, I think it's fun. If you don't get the answer you like, maybe you didn't ask the right question. So when it comes to prompt engineering and trial and error, how can we make sure that the company is safe from an ethics standpoint, from a reputational standpoint?
Yeah, it's a big question, and I think it really starts at the top, which is how do you negotiate? Starting at how do you negotiate your agreements with the Gen AI providers, right? The Open AIs, the Googles, the Anthropics of the world. And I say this because, in many of those corporate contracts, there is, the enterprise level contracts, the contracts are very explicit about our data won't be used as training data. But a number of companies that I know have been sort of going the extra step and getting, dedicated processing space on their AWS sites and all that to make sure that, even the queries that are being run happen in a super secure environment. So I don't think, if you're taking the bull by the horns, as it were, at a leadership level, yes, there's always something to fear. But I think that we're in pretty safe shape, privacy and security wise. The bigger problem, though, is that if you don't have an enterprise account, or you don't have an AI policy in your organization, what we're seeing is that people are using lots of publicly available applications like GPT-4, for example, in the workplace with company data. And this is where the problem really, really gets nasty, because now those models are learning from your data. The processing is not secure in the same way. And so if you don't have a more proactive AI, or Gen AI in particular, strategy for your organization, then your employees are going to start using these tools anyway. Microsoft just did this huge survey that had some pretty astonishing results, that some 80% of workers, bring their own Gen AI to work, and they use it somewhat surreptitiously. So it's really important to recognize that we're in a world now where, because we expect so much of our employees turn to these tools. And if we don't have the right agreements, enterprise level agreements in place in our organizations, and the right policies, then what are they going to do? They're going to just go to the web versions of these tools and use them. And that's where our privacy and security concerns come into play.
Yep. That makes total sense. So with all these tools, and especially since the pandemic, we've all gotten used to conversations like this over Zoom, over Teams. Talk a little bit about digital exhaustion. How can we kind of, settle that a little bit?
Oh, sure. I'm glad you asked this question because I've just my next book is about this topic, digital exhaustion, and
Ooh, is that a
really
scoop?
a bit, yeah. I
Nice.
just submitted the draft the draft to the publisher, so I'm really excited
Great.
about it. The basic premise is that we are just constantly inundated by data and different tools, and it's wearing us out. And I've got 20 years worth of data to show that people are just feeling more and more and more exhausted by digital tools at work and at home, and it's different from feelings of burnout in the workplace, right? It's different than the stress that we experience on a daily basis. And what I found is that there are three key drivers of digital exhaustion. The first is attention. So we are living in a world in which our attention is constantly being pulled in different directions. And we make choices throughout the day that also create more attentional fatigue. When we're on Zoom and we're also like responding to a text message at the same time, and we're doing those kinds of multitasking things that we often laud ourselves for being very productive with, those switches in context across domains, devices, and so on and so forth really exhaust us because our brains are just not made to process multiple stimuli at the same time. They just don't work that way.
Well, and I feel like I can interrupt you for one second. I think about, I'm a multi-screen person for sure. I'll be watching something on TV. I'll have a baseball game on the iPad, and I'll probably be playing a game on my phone. And you realize that a whole scene on TV, a whole chapter of an audiobook went by, and you have no idea what just happened. Yeah. Is that a similar way that the brain is working in this sense?
It is. And, this is sort of a multi-layered problem, right? Because sure, your brain takes time to switch across all those different inputs. There's a concept that I discussed called attention residue, which is that you paying attention in one area and you switch to pay attention in another, and your attention doesn't follow you automatically. And there's good neuroscience research to show this is the case. And Gloria Mark, who's a professor at University of California, Irvine, gives a nice example of like writing on a whiteboard with a marker. You wipe it off and it's mostly gone, but you still see the thing outline of what you did. And that's how our attention works. And so you've got that problem, right? So that's just like at the cognitive level, our mind is fatiguing by switching across so many different inputs. But then there are layers beyond that, because now you've missed something, as you just pointed out, right? Because you were focusing on this area, which creates more work for you to go back and now try to remember, oh, where was I? Or I have to rewind and watch that clip again. And it's that activity, right? It's not just the moving back and forth, but it's those lapses in what we saw and what we learned that cause us to go back and do something again that create more conditions for exhaustion. So, our attentional fatigue is multi-layered. So attention is kind of the first driver. The second is inference and assumptions, really, that we constantly are making inferences all the time about others. And what's sort of ironic is that, digital tools provide us so much data, and platforms like the one that we're on now provide such high fidelity of picture and sound that it's really easy for us to infer that we know more than we do. And what I see time and time again is that it's because we have more data available, we're more confident in the inferences we make about other people. Like, that person likes me, that person's a jerk, that person is not giving their all on this work assignment, whatever it might be. And making those inferences of others and then having to reconcile the emotions we feel about it is super exhausting. It's also the case that we make lots of inferences about ourselves, when we look at ourselves on Zoom, like you and I are doing right now, or whatever the platform is. And you're like, my hair doesn't look so good today, right? Or I look like I got bags under my eyes. And am I that kind of person that always looks tired? And so we don't just see reflections of ourselves in the camera, but we see reflections of ourselves in all the posts that we left on LinkedIn and in the video content that we put out, on YouTube. And because we're constantly exposed to the data about our past behavior, we're always making inferences about ourselves that exhaust us. So So inference is the second. And then the third major driver is emotion, that we we are so saturated with feelings of fear of missing out, right? And anxiety about, are people perceiving me in the right way? And anger about the fact that I seem to be addicted to my phone and I'm looking at, Instagram instead of playing with my kids when I feel like I should be playing with my kids. That there's so much emotion that's sort of bound up in our use of digital tools that it really is exhausting. So you got these three drivers: attention, inference, and emotion. And what we really need to sort of figure out is what are the steps that we take to dampen the effects of these drivers on our exhaustion.
Okay. Yeah. It's one of those things that whether we're talking about business, whether we're talking about personal, that it's in every part of our lives now.
Right. So one of the key things that I've seen, just to jump on this for a second, is that, we have like rampant device proliferation and rampant app proliferation across most of our companies, and it almost seems like for many leaders, the solution to every problem is a technological solution. We get a new app, a new piece of software, whatever it might be. And, now we're in this world in which we have so many devices and applications that those attentions, emotions, and inferences sort of run amok as we're trying to even decide, like, which one do we use for what? I did a project with Asana project management company and Amazon.
Yeah, we use it.
Yeah, recently. And what we found was, people basically spend upwards of 30 minutes a week just deciding what tool to use for a particular purpose. Like, we have that many options available to us that it's exhausting to even choose what tool to use. And in many ways, the only solution, the big solution to the problem, is that leaders need to be much, much more forceful about limiting the number of tools that get bought, purchased, implemented across our organizations. It's really hard for any one employee to do that, and leaders need to take a bigger stand.
Is there something that we as individuals can do, like tonight, or a better habit, or something immediate that we can kind of ease that anxiety or exhaustion a little bit?
Yeah, there's a bunch of things. I'll give you just a couple. So the first one sounds a little bit weird and difficult, but it's actually doable, is to sort of cut out half the tools that you use.
Okay.
And you're like, okay, how do I make that happen, right? And it's actually pretty doable for many people. And I've walked, coached a number of people through this process. But the idea is that if we have fewer apps and we have fewer software programs, right, that we're using on a daily basis, then we don't have to make so many choices about what we're going to use. We have more concentrated information inputs. We don't switch our attention across domains as frequently. And sometimes that means, like, I'm going to choose one platform to do my calls on, right? And so, like, in a given day, somebody might say, hey, Paul, can you be on Zoom? And can you be on Microsoft Teams? And can you be on WebEx, right? And I've just become much more judicious about saying my preferred platform is Zoom, or whatever the platform might be. And in my case, it is Zoom. And I find that in like 90% of cases, other people are like, okay, cool. Like, we had the option of using Zoom too, so I'll just use Zoom. Asking for people's help in consolidating the number of tools that you use is one way of doing that. So, giving up half your tools is one. Another is a process that I call matching. And really the idea here is that we want to match the capabilities of some digital tool with the demands of the task that we're trying to accomplish. So often we have different sorts of activities that we're doing with other people that are not very highly interdependent. They don't require a whole lot of coordination, and in that case, it's really easy for me to do my part. I send you an email or a Slack message, and then you can do your part. And actually getting together on Zoom complicates the situation. Right?
Yep.
Because now I see you sort of look to the side and sort of askance at my question. And I'm like, hey, does Paul think that my idea was dumb? when
Right.
I'm not, right? There's just something in my eye, but now you're creating these more conditions for inference, where if we just had like sent a message on Slack, you wouldn't even have thought that.
Right.
But the opposite is also true, that often we try to communicate things with really lean media, right? Asynchronous, via text, that are trying to deal with issues where a lot of coordination is necessary. And they're highly uncertain, and it's not clear what the right answer is. And in those situations, you got to just like pick up the phone sometimes, right? Or you got to walk to somebody's desk or schedule an in-person meeting, because all the back and forth leads to more inference making, and it
Right.
creates more overload, because now there's 30 emails that I got to sift through to say, well, what did somebody ask in this last round of response and reply? And so matching is really about, what are the affordances of a particular tool? Does it allow me to, or a context face to face, for example, does it allow me to resolve ambiguity? Does it allow us to go back and forth quickly in real time? And is that the amount of coordination that I need to do this particular piece of work? And if it
Right.
is, that's a good match. But if it's not, that's a bad match. And bad
Right.
matches exhaust us. So those are two quick pieces of advice, right? Drop half your tools and
Yep.
make matches that I think we can use
Okay.
like today to help reduce our exhaustion.
That's perfect. I do want to shift gears a little bit. We've
Sure.
talked a lot about technology implementation, processes. You also, a big part of your research is the sociological aspects. We talked about what leaders should do. What do they need to be careful not to do that could disrupt a positive company culture?
So say what not to do to
Correct.
disrupt
Yeah.
a company
Yeah.
culture. Yeah. I think that one thing that I've seen often is that leaders try to push a particular agenda without gaining the right kind of buy-in across the organization before they start pushing that agenda.
Right.
And it ends up, this is like change management 101, right? But
Yep.
it ends up really feeling like somebody is foisting a decision on me, and I don't have the ability to participate in a meaningful way. I see that as one of the biggest problems in terms of kind of change management and
Right.
things that leaders do that inadvertently create bad cultures. That it's work, but it's the right kind of work to make sure that you're identifying who are those key stakeholders in various
Right.
groups that are influencers in my organization that other people look up to and listen to, because they're the ones that people go to for advice about any kind of change or new initiative, to say, does this make sense? Is this something that we should be excited about? And taking the time to identify those people that are influencers, to get their feedback on your idea, to help make them part of the process of planning, is so essential to getting everybody on board in these larger change initiatives. So
Right.
that's one. A second one that I would mention is that, we, just like I said before, how we often think that the solution to most of our problems is throw more technology at it. It often seems like in many organizations, it's like, let's add new policy and let's add new procedure all the time.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite books right now is Bob Sutton and Huggy Rau's The Friction Project, that talks a lot about how good leaders often put friction in place to stop policies from
Sure.
proliferating,
Yep.
or technologies from proliferating. And they remove frictions where they're unnecessary and where they're creating bottlenecks in our work. And I think that's an important area for leaders to really focus on, is trying to really recognize that when we spend all this time and money hiring smart people, we have to let them do their thing. And
Yep.
we often just get in their way by putting policies and technologies and all this kind of stuff as impediments to their work. And our job as leaders has to be to remove obstacles that make it difficult for them to be the bright, shining stars we hired them to be.
Yep.
And also to sometimes put obstacles in place so that they can be buffered in ways that allow them to get their work done. And I think not paying attention to that role of, friction inducer and friction remover is an area where leaders often fail.
That's perfect. I'm going to ask a huge general question.
Okay.
In your years of research, is there anything that really stands out to you that surprised you?
Oh, yeah. A lot of things. I think the thing that has surprised me the most is the power of senior leaders' words.
Okay.
They're just words
Yep.
about where are we going as a company? What is our culture? Why do we want to use this new set of technologies that we're implementing? But what leaders say really matters. Like, time and time again, I just see that employees at all levels of the organization are constantly looking for meaning in everything. And
Yep.
what leaders say about the company provides a framework for them to ascribe meaning to everything that's happening. And,
Right.
if you basically say, like, something as trivial as this new technology is going to speed up the way you work, people are looking constantly for, did this technology speed up the way that I worked? And
Right.
if it doesn't, then they stop using it because they're like, she told us it was supposed to speed up the way we work. Like,
Right.
and so it's not doing that. So we're being good employees by not using it. That's something that's trivial, right? But something as big as, we put people first in this organization, right? Like, we care about well-being and so on and so forth. People interpret everything that happens right through those lenses. And
Sure.
I know that this sounds kind of trivial, but it constantly surprises me how much people are hearkening back to the things that their leaders say and using those as frameworks to make meaning. And boy, I just have seen it over and over and over again. And I think the implication for our leaders is watch what you say and
Sure.
be intentional and be strategic and be real and genuine when you're talking in casual settings and in very public corporate-wide settings.
Yep. It's great advice for life.
Yeah.
Okay. So I like to, as we get to the end of the conversation, get to a lightning round. Okay. 3 questions I did not prep you on. I just want your first reaction.
Okay.
Do you have a favorite podcast? Besides this one, of course.
Yeah. I love Brene Brown's Dare to Lead podcast. It's one of my favorites. She just has great guests.
Okay. In an alternate universe, what would you be doing for a living?
I would be a contractor, mostly renovating homes.
That's cool.
Beautiful homes.
Okay. Imagine you're already halfway to work. What is one item that would make you turn around to go back and get it?
Probably if I left my laptop at home.
Okay.
I would go
I've done that. That has happened that, I've gotten 3/4 of the way to work, realized I didn't have my laptop, and you're taking the next exit and turning around.
You got it. Unfortunately, that's probably the only thing. I forget my lunch a lot and I just keep going.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. And I think, especially with, the watches and things like that, if I forgot my phone, I think I could get through.
Yeah.
So great.
Agreed.
Love it. So Paul Leonardi, people can find more information about you, of course, on our website, sternstrategy.com. See some of your great writing there, some excellent presentation videos, find out how they can work with you. Where else can we find you online?
At paulleonardi.com. And I've got a bunch of speech topics there that you can kind of peruse, and access to lots of my current writings in places like Harvard Business Review and elsewhere. And you can also find me at UC Santa Barbara, where I'm a professor and the chair of the technology management department.
Great. Paul, I appreciate your time so much. I know how busy you are. Excited about the new book.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining us.
Great. Thanks, Justin. Great questions today. This is a lot of fun.
Thank you.